Did you know that Singapore has consistently ranked among the top places to be during the pandemic, even dethroning New Zealand to claim the top spot in April? Nevertheless, we here at Team Monopolists believe that we can do even better. Hence, stellar as Singapore's policies may be, perhaps it should consider drawing inspiration from other countries moving forward. Why look far from home? At least that's what we think, which is why today we aim to discuss some of Asia's finest. Have other Asian economic policies got what it takes to complement Singapore's ones? Or will they simply prove counterproductive? Let's find out. Japan, being the third largest economy in the world, with a low unemployment rate and high debt to GDP ratio, has managed to keep its economy afloat during the pandemic. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had authorized the handout of almost 117.1 trillion yen for this very purpose, in what was dubbed the Emergency Economic Package. This expansionary fiscal policy helped to increase domestic consumption in Japan through the handout of monthly transfer payments. This increase in domestic consumption has caused a rise in Japan's aggregate demand, resulting in a multiplied rise in the national income, as households who receive higher factor income spend them on additional goods and services. While this policy is appropriate in the context of Japan, where domestic consumption makes up almost 56% of its GDP, it would not be so in the Singaporean context. This is because domestic consumption makes up a much smaller part of Singapore's GDP, and thus the initial rise in autonomous consumption wouldn't be as pronounced as that for Japan. Moreover, Singapore's size of multiplier is very small due to its incredibly large withdrawals, as evidenced by its high marginal propensity to save as well as to import. Hence, the final rise in its national income as a proportion of the initial rise in its autonomous consumption would be very small. Lastly, while the handing out of transfer payments may be a solution to the mere symptoms of the economic slump that COVID-19 has caused, considering the nature of the Singapore government, which has significant accumulated budget reserves, this policy is likely to be sustainable in the long run, as it wouldn't significantly worsen Singapore's budget balance. One monetary policy worth noting is quantitative easing, otherwise known as QE. In March 2020, the Bank of Japan announced a comprehensive set of measures, including targeted liquidity provision through an increase in the size and frequency of Japanese government bond purchases. This enabled the Bank of Japan to increase the money supply, injecting a large amount of cash into the economy. Domestic consumption expenditures thus increased, causing an increase in aggregate demand, hence a multiplied rise in Japan's GDP. Nevertheless, increased flow of funds incentivized investors to invest in the foreign exchange market rather than in local corporate securities, failing in further stimulating economic recovery. But quantitative easing seems to be effective overall. Now, what if Singapore adopted the same policy? QE has similar drawbacks as transfer payments of increasing a non-main driver of growth and a small multiplier. However, QE might increase supply of Singapore dollars in the foreign exchange market, which will cause it to depreciate. This will boost the net export revenue, Singapore's main economic growth driving force, thus overcoming the drawbacks. While QE seems to be a good short-term response, it is unlikely a good fit to Singapore in the long term. QE will undermine the market mechanism, which may affect its stead as a financial hub, and has the potential to build up bubbles as asset prices continue to rise. While Japan's measures tend to be more targeted in that they aim to alleviate the immediate problems caused by the pandemic, another one of the Asian tigers, South Korea, has taken a different approach, choosing to focus on long-term development.
Like other countries, Korea suffered a large fall in GDP during COVID periods. In response, it has cut its interest rates to a record low of 0.5% to stimulate investment and consumption, though with limited effects given the bleak outlook of the economy. The high debt to GDP ratio in Korea has greatly limited the stimulus packages given out, despite the importance of consumption expenditure in the economy. Therefore, Korea announced the ambitious Korean New Deal, aiming to transform itself into a digital economy via government investment in infrastructures such as databases and 5G networks. The injection brought immediate rises in aggregate demand, triggering a multiplied increase in real GDP as evidenced by Korea's fast recovery. In the long run, a stronger integration of digital infrastructure would improve total factor productivity, stimulating aggregate supply for sustained economic growth. Singapore has a thing or two to learn from it. Though limited by a smaller multiplier size, Singapore would still benefit hugely in the long term. The rise in productivity would improve Singapore's export price competitiveness for greater actual growth through the international substitution effect. Expansions in productive capacity would allow sustained economic growth after demand catches up. However, a rush into the digital economy could lead to higher structural unemployment, exacerbating income inequality. Hence, Singapore should also take complementary measures to achieve inclusive growth. All in all, considering the policies implemented by Japan and South Korea, it is essential for Singapore to maintain its standing as a global financial hub and build a resilient post-COVID economy. It has to adopt policies that are beneficial in the long term. So, if you thought that Singapore cannot do any better than it already has in dealing with the impact of COVID-19, we hope that this short video by Team Monopolists has changed your perspectives. Thank you.